Okay, imagine this for a second. What if your country's entire economy depended on a deal with Russia? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and, pretty pragmatic argument coming out of the Faroe Islands. It's a tiny nation, but it's facing this exact dilemma. And honestly, it's a perspective on the Ukraine conflict that you have probably never heard before.
And really, everything we're about to talk about boils down to this one powerful Faroese proverb: don't bite the hand that feeds you. This single idea is the absolute key to unlocking a really tough argument about survival, about pragmatism, and about a small nation's place in a world of giants.
All right, so let's get into it. We're breaking down an article by an author named Ole Breckman, and he uses that exact proverb to challenge all the calls for the Faroe Islands to put sanctions on Russia. He's basically asking a really provocative question. Does it make any sense for a tiny nation to risk its entire economy over a conflict that, let's be honest, it can't possibly influence?
And that leads us right into the heart of his argument. This isn't about ideology, not really. It's about cold, hard numbers. And this is where you start to see the sheer scale of what is on the line for the Faroese economy.
Before we even get to the gigantic figures, the author wants us to think about the people involved. We're talking about just 4 or 5 huge modern fishing vessels. That's it. But each one has a crew of 30 to 40 people. And for every single one of those ships, the author estimates there are hundreds of jobs supported back on land. So this is not some abstract economic debate. This is about entire communities.
So, what does this dependence actually look like in dollars and cents, or, kroner? First up, you've got exports. Every single year, the Faroe Islands sell 1.2 billion Danish kroners worth of fish, think herring, mackerel, directly to the Russian market.
But that's not even the whole story. On top of that, their fishing fleet has rights to fish in the Russian-controlled Barents Sea. That catch alone is worth another 500 million kroner every single year.
So you add all of that together, and you are looking at 1.7 billion kroner at risk. And to lose this, Breckman argues, isn't just a bump in the road. He uses a very specific phrase. He calls it commercial suicide for the nation.
So you have to be asking, how in the world did this critical dependency on Russia even happen? Well, as the author explains it, this wasn't some accident. Nope, this was a calculated choice made decades ago out of what he calls sheer necessity.
Let's go back to 1977. The world was changing, and other countries were starting to expand their fishing limits out to 200 miles. For the Faroe Islands, this was a terrifying prospect. They were facing what the author calls an aquarium, the fear of being trapped in their own tiny territorial waters, which just weren't enough to sustain their whole industry.
In this timeline, from the author's point of view, it tells a story of survival. That 1977 deal with the Soviet Union, that was a lifeline. Then, after a brutal economic crash in 1992, the nation had to rebuild itself. And in the massive economic boom after 2010, that relationship with Russia, that Barents Sea fleet, was a uniquely stable and profitable pillar of their entire fishing industry. Okay, so with that economic history all laid out, the argument takes a very sharp turn right into geopolitics. And Breckman's take here is, let's just say, just as direct and uncompromising. Now, here Breckman makes a really controversial comparison. He argues that the Soviet Union back in the 70s, with hundreds of nuclear missiles aimed at the West, was a far, far greater threat than Russia is today. And yet, even back then, the Faroes made a pragmatic deal to survive. The implication is pretty clear. If it was an acceptable choice then, why isn't it now?
His geopolitical stance is, it's blunt. He argues that stopping Russia is a job for the superpowers, for NATO. He specifically mentions Trump and Zelensky, not the Faroese parliament. He even points out that the EU has been a trade adversary in the past. The core message here is unwavering. This is not our fight.
And all of this, the economics, the history, the geopolitics, it all builds to one final stark warning to the leaders of the Faroe Islands. It brings a whole argument full circle, right back to that core idea of economic self-preservation. And his conclusion leaves zero room for doubt. To lose this absolutely vital economic relationship out of what he calls foolishness, that wouldn't just be an own goal for the country. It would be a self-inflicted commercial suicide. It's a powerful, and you have to admit, provocative end to his case. So, as we wrap up this explainer on Ole Breckman's article, it really leaves us with a truly challenging question.
For a small nation, when your survival and your prosperity are right there on the line, where do you draw the line between economic pragmatism and moral principle? It is a dilemma with absolutely no easy answers.